I was sitting across from my wife at Le Cirque, watching candlelight dance across her face as we celebrated 20 years of marriage. Just that morning, we had renewed our vows in front of family and friends, and Margaret had shed tears as she promised to love me forever. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I never expected to hear her voice around the corner. "I have already transferred most of his inheritance to accounts he cannot access," she told her brother. "Once the house is sold next month, I am filing for divorce and taking the kids to California." I stood frozen, my world collapsing. We had just renewed our vows hours ago. When I returned to the table, I ordered the most expensive champagne and said nothing. But this morning, she was screaming outside my house. Let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button. And prepare yourself for what happened when my picture-perfect marriage shattered in an instant. I first met Margaret 22 years ago during our junior year at Northwestern. Everyone called her Maggie back then. She was studying literature while I was in business, but we both ended up at the same house party on a cold October night. She stood in the corner holding a red cup, looking uncomfortable and out of place. I walked over, introduced myself, and asked if she wanted to escape the chaos for some real food. "I thought you would never ask," she said with a smile that made her hazel eyes light up. We ended up at an all-night diner talking until sunrise about our dreams, our families, and our favorite books. By the time the morning crowd started filtering in for breakfast, I knew she was special. We dated for 2 years before I proposed on graduation day. Our wedding was simple, but warm. Just close friends and family gathered at her parents' backyard in Wisconsin. I landed a position at a growing tech company in their marketing department while Maggie worked part-time at a local publishing house. We rented a small apartment, saved money, and eventually welcomed our son James 3 years into our marriage. Sophia followed 3 years after that. Life was busy, but good. Over the years, I climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming marketing director at TechVision, one of the largest technology firms in the country. The hours were long, but the compensation allowed us to move from our starter home to a larger house in a neighborhood with excellent schools. Maggie reduced her hours at work to focus on the kids, though she always kept her foot in the publishing world doing freelance editing from home. James grew into a thoughtful, quiet 17-year-old who excelled at math and science. Sophia, now 14, was outgoing and artistic, filling our home with her paintings and constant chatter. We seemed like the quintessential American family success story. Everything changed last year, when my father passed away unexpectedly. Dad had been frugal, his entire life investing wisely and living modestly, despite his success as an engineer. When his will was read, I was shocked to learn he had left me nearly $2 million and a portfolio of investments. It was more money than I had ever imagined having at once. Maggie and I decided to use part of the inheritance to buy a larger house in an even better school district. The plan was to sell our current home once the new place was ready. We put down a substantial deposit and began the process of preparing our house for sale. Looking back, I can see that things started changing after the inheritance. Subtle shifts in our relationship that I dismissed as temporary stress. Maggie became more distant, spending more time on her phone and making excuses to miss family dinners. When I asked if everything was okay, she would smile and say she was just tired or busy with a new editing project. Despite these small tensions, I never questioned the foundation of our marriage. When our 20th anniversary approached, I suggested we renew our vows. Maggie seemed surprised but quickly warmed to the idea, becoming enthusiastically involved in planning a small ceremony with close friends and family. Her sudden engagement with the anniversary preparations reassured me that any distance between us was just my imagination. I had no idea that while I was planning to reaffirm my commitment, my wife was planning her escape. The morning of our anniversary was perfect. We held the vow renewal ceremony in the garden of the hotel where we would be staying that night. White roses and lilies decorated the intimate space, and about 30 of our closest friends and family attended. James stood as my best man, looking handsome and grown up in his first proper suit. Sophia was her mother's maid of honor, beaming in a pale blue dress that matched her eyes. Our pastor, from when we first married, had agreed to officiate, making the circle feel complete. When Maggie walked down the short aisle toward me, she looked as beautiful as she had 20 years ago. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, her dark hair swept up elegantly. As we faced each other and repeated our vows, she looked directly into my eyes and promised to love, honor, and cherish me for the rest of our lives. Her voice cracked with emotion as she spoke, and I felt certain of our love and future together. Alistair has been my rock, my best friend, and my greatest champion for 20 years, she said during her speech afterward. I cannot imagine my life without him, and I look forward to 20 more years of building our life together. Everyone applauded, and many wiped away tears. Her brother Jack stood in the back smiling tightly and checking his watch. After the ceremony and a small reception, we had a few hours to relax before our dinner reservation. We returned to our hotel suite where Maggie said she needed to make a few calls about Sophia's upcoming school trip. I used the time to shower and dress for dinner, feeling grateful and deeply content with my life. Our anniversary dinner was at Le Cirque, the same restaurant where we had celebrated our first anniversary. We could not have afforded it back then, but I had saved for months to surprise her. Now with my director position and the inheritance, such luxuries were easier to manage. I had reserved a quiet corner table and arranged for a special tasting menu with wine pairings. Throughout the appetizers and main course, Maggie seemed relaxed and happy. She reminisced about our early days together, asked about an upcoming project at work, and discussed James's college prospects. Nothing in her behavior suggested anything was wrong. After the main course, I excused myself to use the restroom. The bathrooms were located down a short hallway near the back of the restaurant. As I approached, I heard a familiar voice coming from around a corner near the emergency exit. Maggie was speaking in hushed but intense tones. "Everything is proceeding as planned," she said. "I have already transferred most of his inheritance to accounts he cannot access. Jessica has all the paperwork ready." I froze, uncertain if I had misheard. Jessica was a name I recognized, a lawyer friend of Maggie's from her college days who now practiced family law. "Once the house is sold next month, I am filing for divorce and taking the kids to California," Maggie continued. "The job offer is still open, and Steve says I can start whenever I arrive." Steve. The name registered dimly. Pylangs, her old colleague from publishing who had moved to San Francisco last year to start his own literary agency. "Jack, I know what I am doing," she said, firmly responding to whatever her brother had said. "Alistair is too trusting. He will never see it coming. By the time he figures it out, everything will be settled." I leaned against the wall, feeling as though the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. My chest constricted painfully, and for a moment I could not breathe. The woman who had looked into my eyes hours earlier and promised to love me forever was calmly discussing how she was stealing my inheritance and planning to take our children away. The vow renewal was his idea, she continued, a note of impatience in her voice. "It makes everything cleaner. Legally. Shows we were in a committed relationship right before the split. Jessica says it will help with the division of assets." I heard footsteps and quickly moved toward the bathroom, locking myself in a stall until I could control my breathing. My hands were shaking and nausea rolled through me in waves. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. How could I return to the table and face her as if I had not just heard her betrayal laid bare? But I did. I walked back to our table, sat down across from my wife of 20 years, and forced a smile. "Everything okay?" she asked, reaching across to touch my hand. "You were gone a while." "Everything is perfect," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "In fact, I think we should order the most expensive champagne on the menu. This is a night to celebrate after all." If she noticed anything different about my demeanor, she did not show it. She smiled and squeezed my hand. "That sounds wonderful." For the remainder of the evening, I observed Maggie, as if seeing her for the first time. The way she tilted her head when asking about my upcoming business trip. How she mentioned James's interest in colleges in California. Her casual reference to how much our house had appreciated in value. Each innocent-sounding comment now carried sinister undertones. I matched her performance with one of my own. I discussed future vacation plans, talked about retirement dreams, and even brought up the idea of a second honeymoon for our 25th anniversary. All the while, my mind was racing, cataloging everything I would need to do to protect myself and our children. As we toasted with the $300 champagne, Maggie smiled and said, "To many more years." I clinked my glass against hers and replied, to getting exactly what you deserve." She beamed, interpreting my words as romantic rather than the promise they actually were. I did not sleep that night. After Maggie fell asleep in our hotel suite, I carefully extracted her phone from her purse and found it locked. However, her laptop was in her bag, and I knew her password. A combination of her birthday and Sophia's middle name. She had never changed it, perhaps never imagining I would have reason to look. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Emails between her and Jessica discussed the divorce strategy in clinical detail. Messages to her brother Jack revealed this plan had been in motion for nearly 6 months. Bank statements showed multiple transfers to accounts I had never seen before. And most devastatingly, intimate emails between her and Steve outlined their relationship and future plans together. By morning, I had photographed everything important and emailed the files to myself. When Maggie woke, I suggested we have breakfast in bed and acted as if nothing had changed. She seemed pleased with my affection, completely unaware that I had discovered her betrayal. After checking out of the hotel, I told her I needed to stop by the office briefly to check on a project. Instead, I drove directly to Thomas Wilson's office. Thomas was not just my lawyer, but also a friend from college who had handled my father's estate. His secretary looked surprised when I insisted on seeing him immediately, but something in my expression must have conveyed the urgency. "Alistair, you look like hell," Thomas said when I entered his office. What happened? I laid out everything. The overheard conversation, the evidence from Maggie's laptop, and the realization that my wife of 20 years had been systematically betraying me while planning to take my children across the country. Thomas listened without interruption, taking notes, and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "First things first," he said. "We need to secure what assets we can, immediately. Then we need to document everything and prepare for what will likely be a complicated divorce." For the next 4 hours, we worked methodically. Thomas made calls to banks and financial institutions while I provided account numbers and passwords. We discovered that Maggie had already transferred nearly $800,000, almost half my inheritance, to offshore accounts in her name only. "This is actually good news," Thomas said. "What she has done is illegal. Inheritance is separate property in most cases, and her actions show clear intent to defraud. We will file emergency motions to freeze all accounts and recover the transferred funds." By mid-afternoon, we had secured the remaining assets, filed preliminary paperwork, and developed a strategy. Thomas suggested I return home and act normally for a few days while he built the case. "Do not confront her yet," he warned. "We need time to make sure everything is properly documented." The next 3 days were the most difficult of my life. I smiled through family dinners, discussed household matters, and even helped Maggie plan an open house for our home sale. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield of lies. During this time, I found moments to speak privately with James and Sophia, asking indirect questions about how they would feel about moving to California. Their responses were illuminating. "California. Why would we go there?" James asked, genuinely confused. "All my friends are here, and I have already applied to Northwestern and University of Chicago." Sophia was even more direct. "I would hate moving away from my art program and the dance team." "Is someone talking about moving?" Their reactions confirmed what I had suspected. Maggie had not discussed her plans with our children. She was preparing to uproot them without consideration for their wishes. I also used this time to gather more evidence. I found paperwork for the new house purchase that showed Maggie had changed the ownership structure to her name only, a modification I had apparently signed, but had no recollection of doing so. A visit to our bank revealed she had opened new accounts using our joint funds. With each discovery, my determination to fight grew stronger. On the 4th day, Thomas called to say everything was in place. "We have court orders freezing the offshore accounts and documentation of all the fraudulent transfers. It is time to confront her, but on our terms. Bring her to my office tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. Tell her it is about the house sale. That evening, I casually mentioned to Maggie that we needed to meet with Thomas the next day to finalize some paperwork for the new house. She agreed without hesitation, suggesting we go out for lunch beforehand. The calm confidence in her voice made my stomach turn. She truly believed I suspected nothing. The next day, Maggie dressed carefully for our meeting, choosing an expensive suit she rarely wore. She seemed almost excited as we drove to Thomas's office, chatting about furniture for the new house and schools in the area. I responded with non-committal noises, focusing on maintaining my composure. Thomas's office was in a sleek downtown building with views of the city skyline. His secretary showed us into the conference room where Thomas waited along with another lawyer I did not recognize. "Maggie Allister, thank you for coming," Thomas said formally. "This is Patricia Lawson. She will be joining us today." Maggie frowned slightly. "I thought this was about the house closing. Why do we need 2 lawyers?" Thomas looked at me, and I nodded. It was time. "Maggie," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "this meeting is not about the house closing. It is about the $800,000 you illegally transferred from my inheritance to offshore accounts, your plans to file for divorce after selling our house, and your intention to take our children to California to be with Steve." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she stared at me in shocked silence before attempting to recover. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but her voice wavered. "Allister, what is this nonsense?" Thomas slid a folder across the table. "Mrs. Cooper, we have documented evidence of multiple fraudulent transfers, including dates, account numbers, and confirmation codes. We also have copies of emails between you and your lawyer discussing your divorce strategy, as well as communications with Steve Bennett regarding your relationship and plans to relocate to San Francisco." Maggie's expression hardened. "You went through my private emails. That is an invasion of privacy, no more an invasion than secretly transferring my inheritance while planning to abandon our marriage," I replied. "I heard you, Maggie. At LeCirque talking to Jack on the phone. I heard every word about how you had already transferred my money, how you were going to wait until the house sold, file for divorce, and take the kids to California, hours after renewing our vows." Her face registered shock, then calculation. "You misunderstood. I was discussing something else entirely." "Save it," I said tiredly. "I have seen the emails to Jessica about using the vow renewal to strengthen your position legally. I know about the job with Steve's agency, the apartment you have already looked at in San Francisco, all of it." Patricia Lawson spoke up. "Mrs. Cooper, I should inform you that we have already obtained court orders freezing all accounts associated with the fraudulently transferred funds. Additionally, we have filed motions regarding the attempted concealment of marital assets and submitted evidence of your plan to remove the children from their established residence without proper agreement." Maggie's composure cracked. "You cannot do this. I have worked for 20 years supporting your career, raising your children. I deserve half of everything, half of our marital assets." "Yes," I agreed. "Not my entire inheritance through deception. Not our children against their will." "The children will want to be with me," she insisted. "I am their mother." "Have you asked them?" I countered. "James is applying to colleges here. Sophia is deeply involved in her art and dance programs. Neither has any desire to move to California." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. She had been so focused on her escape plan that she had not considered our children might resist. "I love them more than anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Everything I did was for their future." "No," I replied quietly. "It was for your future with Steve. The man you have been seeing behind my back while I worked to provide for our family." Her expression shifted from defensive to pleading. "Allister, our marriage has been over for years. You were always working, always focused on your career. Steve understands me, appreciates me in ways you never did. Then you should have asked for a divorce honestly," I said. "Instead, you manipulated me, lied to me, and tried to steal from me while planning to take my children away. And you did it all with a smile, even renewing vows you had no intention of keeping." Thomas interjected before Maggie could respond. "We are prepared to negotiate a fair settlement that acknowledges both your contributions to the marriage, Mrs. Cooper." But the fraudulent transfers must be reversed immediately, and any agreement must include transparent co-parenting arrangements that consider the children's established lives and preferences. Maggie looked from Thomas to me then, to Patricia, assessing her options. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. I need to speak with my own lawyer. This meeting is over. Of course, Thomas agreed. But be aware that time is of the essence regarding the court orders. Your lawyer should contact us today. As Maggie gathered her things, she paused and looked directly at me. You will regret this, Alistair. I will not be treated this way after 20 years. I already regret the last 20 years, I replied. But I will not regret standing up for myself and our children now. She left without another word, the door closing firmly behind her. Thomas turned to me. That went about as expected. Now we wait for her lawyer to contact us, which should happen within hours. The evidence is overwhelmingly against her, Alistair. She has no choice but to negotiate. I nodded, feeling oddly empty. The confrontation I had been dreading was over, but there was no satisfaction in it. Only the hollow recognition that the woman I had loved for 2 decades was a stranger to me. What happens next? I asked. We work on the divorce settlement, Patricia said practically. We secure your financial assets, establish custody arrangements, and move forward. Based on the evidence, we are in a strong position. I thanked them both and left the office unsure where to go. I could not face returning to the house Maggie and I had shared, so I checked into a hotel. That evening, I called James and Sophia and asked them to meet me for dinner, knowing it was time to tell them the truth. 2 weeks of intense legal negotiations followed. Maggie's lawyer, Jessica, initially took an aggressive stance, but retreated quickly when Thomas presented the evidence of financial fraud. The court ordered all transferred funds to be returned, and a forensic accountant was appointed to trace every dollar. Meanwhile, I had the painful conversation with James and Sophia. We met at a quiet restaurant where I gently explained that their mother and I would be divorcing. I did not share all the details of Maggie's betrayal, but was honest about her relationship with Steve and her plans to move to California. Their reactions surprised me. James admitted he had suspected something was wrong for months. Mom has been having a lot of private phone conversations, he said. And I saw texts from Steve on her phone when she asked me to check something. I was afraid to say anything. Sophia cried, but then asked pointedly, was she going to make us move to California without asking us? When I nodded, her tears turned to indignation. How could she do that? My whole life is here, I assured them both, that whatever happened, their needs and wishes would be central to any custody arrangement. You two are my priority, I told them. Always have been, always will be. A week later, the first installment of returned funds appeared in my account. Thomas called to say Maggie had agreed to a mediated divorce settlement rather than a prolonged court battle. Her lawyer had likely advised her that the evidence of financial misconduct would severely damage her position with any judge. The proposed settlement included equal division of marital assets excluding my inheritance, which would be returned in full. The most contentious point was custody. Maggie insisted on being the primary custodial parent, while I argued for joint custody with the children's preferences heavily weighted. When it became clear the children would need to express their preferences formally, Maggie began a campaign to win them back. She showed up at their schools, sent expensive gifts, and called constantly with tearful apologies and promises. Neither James nor Sophia was swayed. James at 17 was firm in his decision to remain with me. Mom was going to disrupt my college applications and move me across the country without even asking me, he said. I cannot trust her right now. Sophia was more conflicted but ultimately also chose to stay primarily with me. I love Mom, she said, but I do not understand why she did this, and I do not want to leave my school and friends. When Maggie learned of their decisions through the mediator, something in her broke. On a rainy Thursday morning, 3 weeks after our confrontation in Thomas's office, she appeared at the rental house I had moved into with the kids. I was preparing breakfast when the pounding on the door began, followed by Maggie's voice, high and frantic. Let me see my children. You cannot keep them from me. James and Sophia came downstairs alarmed by the commotion. I asked them to stay inside while I went to the door. Maggie stood on the porch, mascara streaming down her face, hair wild and unkempt. "What have you told them?" she demanded. "How dare you turn my children against me?" "I told them the truth, Maggie," I said calmly. "That we are divorcing, that you plan to move them to California, and that they have a choice in where they live." "They are my children," she screamed. "You had no right. They are our children," I corrected. "And they are old enough to have input on their lives." Behind me, the door opened and James stepped out. "Mom, stop this," he said firmly. "Dad did not turn us against you. You did that yourself, when you made plans that affected us, without even asking what we wanted." Maggie stared at him, her anger collapsing into grief. "James, please. I love you. Everything I did was for us to have a better life." "A better life would have included asking us what we wanted," Sophia said, appearing beside her brother. "And not lying to Dad and trying to take his money." Maggie's shoulders sagged. She looked at the three of us standing together and seemed to finally understand what she had lost. Not just her husband or her plans, but the trust and respect of her children. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she whispered. "But you did," I replied softly. "Actions have consequences, Maggie. You cannot tear apart a family secretly and expect everyone to simply accept it." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "What do I do now?" "You start by respecting our children's decisions. Then, you work on rebuilding trust, honestly this time." I paused. "The divorce will proceed, but no one is keeping you from being their mother. That is up to you." Maggie nodded slowly, then turned to leave. As she walked to her car, her steps heavy with defeat, I felt no triumph, only sadness for the family we had been and would never be again. 6 months have passed since that rainy morning. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago with a fair division of assets and a custody arrangement that respects James and Sophia's wishes. Maggie did move to California and took the job with Steve's agency, but their relationship ended shortly after she arrived. The fantasy of their new life together could not withstand the reality of what she had sacrificed to get there. James is now in his senior year, accepted early to Northwestern like he always wanted. Sophia has thrown herself into her art, processing her feelings through paintings that show both her pain and resilience. We all attended family therapy, learning to navigate our new reality and heal from the wounds of betrayal. Maggie visits every month, staying at a nearby hotel and spending time with the kids. These visits were awkward at first, but have gradually become more comfortable. She is working to rebuild her relationship with our children, and they are cautiously allowing her back into their lives. We maintain a civil co-parenting relationship, communicating primarily about the children's needs and schedules. As for me, I have found strength I never knew I possessed. The man who was blindsided at an anniversary dinner has been replaced by someone more aware, more assertive, and paradoxically more open to genuine connection. I recently began dating again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Sarah is a literature professor who understands complicated family dynamics and approaches our situation with compassion and patience. The inheritance that almost tore our family apart has been secured. I have created trusts for James and Sophia's education and future, honoring my father's legacy in the way he would have wanted. The new house Maggie and I had planned to buy was sold to another family, and I purchased a comfortable home closer to the children's schools. Throughout this ordeal, I have learned painful but valuable lessons. Trust should be given carefully and verified regularly, even in the closest relationships. Intuition deserves attention. The small signs of trouble I ignored might have revealed the truth sooner had I been willing to see them. And most importantly, true strength comes not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it with integrity and purpose. If you have ever faced betrayal or unexpected endings, know that survival is possible. More than survival, renewal. The pain does not disappear entirely, but it transforms into wisdom that guides you toward authenticity and deeper connections. The night I overheard my wife plotting to leave with my children and inheritance marked the end of one chapter in my life, but it also began another. One where I am more present, more aware, and ultimately more at peace with myself and my place in the world. Have you ever experienced a moment of clarity that changed everything? A time when painful truth led to unexpected growth? Share your story in the comments below. And if this account of rebuilding after betrayal resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest wounds can become pathways to healing. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most difficult endings create space for the most authentic beginnings.